Hi, and welcome to the 53rd TiddlyWiki Hangout. I'm Jeremy Ruston, the creator of TiddlyWiki, and I'm joined today by Eric. Eric, would you like to say hi and where you are and your involvement with TiddlyWiki?
Hi there, Eric Schulman here. I'm in Silicon Valley, California, and I'm the author of Tiddly Tools and the maintainer of TiddlyWiki Classic. And I've been involved with TiddlyWiki since 2005, so almost 10 years now.
I think Eric was involved in it before it even existed, in fact, but we just haven't quite worked out the terminology. Nathan, hi, would you like to say hello?
Hello, I'm Nathan Kane. I'm a developer from the United States, and I've been working with TiddlyWiki for several months now, both as user and developer.
Indeed, it's great to have you here, Nathan. Nathan's made a number of really useful contributions. And Ton, would you like to say hi and where you're from?
Hi, I'm Ton Gerner from the Netherlands. I'm a long-time user of TiddlyWiki, TiddlyWiki Classic. I started in 2007, so it's quite a long time ago. And about half a year busy with TiddlyWiki 5, making some customization guides.
Indeed, being and giving those back to the community, and they're referenced very often by TiddlyWiki people these days. So guys, thank you very much for giving up your time in the morning or afternoon respectively. We'll kick straight off with some questions. We've got a few questions queued up in the Q&A app. So with these ones, I'll select them and YouTube knows that we're answering the question, and then we'll move on to questions that aren't recorded. So the first question is from Paolo, pointing out a small inconsistency in the tag manager. When I choose a color by HTML name, the horizontal color stripe remains black instead of reflecting the selected color. Same problem when editing the tiddler of the tag. So I'll screen share and just show you what the problem is that Paolo is referring to. So that's if I go into, well, Tag Manager is one easy place to do it. So we can see here we've got colors which are expressed in hex, and then there's a color picker alongside, and I can use. Oh, is the screen share working? Yes.
Yes.
And I can adjust the color. The syntax also allows us to use CSS color names, which would be things like red and dark green. You can just sort of guess at these things, which of lilac isn't a color. Pink is a color. The problem is that if the color is specified as the CSS color name, then although you see the correct color on the tag pill, this guy is wrong. And if we do a view source, not a view source, a thingy, you can possibly even see that the I don't know, that's making it any clearer. But anyway, the problem is that the HTML5 color picker control requires a color expressed in hex and doesn't know how to interpret a CSS color name. So it's
Jeremy, I just dropped the link in the text. Technically, I suppose there might be a subset that's only CSS supported, but it's actually the X11 color names, and there's a full table definition for a huge set of names, but potentially that kind of thing could be easily mapped into their corresponding hex codes so that you could support them.
Yes, I think that so you one absolutely could imagine replacing these with hex values, looking them up. One of the other problems, though, is easier to see if we go and look at the palettes. That when we look at the palette editor, you can see that some of the colors are set to be another color. So that's tricky because that's not actually a CSS color. It's an indirection to a color. So I'm not absolutely sure that we can fix this properly. I suspect the best we can do is to make it less confusing, as in it feels like a bug at the moment. So I mean, if we had here,
Jeremy, the syntax is a little fuzzy on my screen, but that's a macro, yes?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
yeah.
so you're doing macro expansion there. So potentially, what if we had another macro called color name, which, you know, and so clearly could be evaluated there.
Yes, and so I mean, when we evaluate this, we get a hex color back. Well, no, we get back whatever colors in muted foreground, which might be hex. But
right.
the
what I'm saying is that you're already processing that field to do macro expansion on it.
Yes, that's right.
So we could make another macro which would map the color name to the color to an RGB.
Yeah. I mean, then what they'd lose, of course, is the ability to do that kind of thing, which is sort of quite natural in its way. What we could do is we can have a swatch, a color swatch that would always be correctly colored. So at the moment, this little widget is doing two things. It's both being the button that you use to bring up the color picker, and it's indicating the current color. So we could separate those out, have an ordinary div that indicates the selected color, reduce the size of this so that it becomes more the button that you use to change the bigger bar, if you see what I mean.
Right.
But it's unquestionably confusing as things stand.
Now the other question is, how many times do people really use? I mean, other than simple color names, red, blue, green, how many times do people actually use these color names?
I think indeed that the more threatening version, I mean, the more common version is people who doing these in directions. So the fact that that doesn't get rendered as the actual muted foreground color. So that's the one that more people are going to run into. I guess the people who are keen on recoloring their tags might run into it too. I think I stopped using. I had a few CSS color names that I was using, and I stopped using them to try to reduce this problem.
Jeremy?
Hiya.
As far as I remember, the 3-digit code gave problems as well. I raised a ticket about the colors.
Oh, yes, that does ring a bell. Let's go and test that out. Yes, the same thing. So that color FED, it works, but it doesn't. It's not the right format for the color picker for the extra. So tricky. I mean,
so this is a limit of the color picker, then?
Yes, and so basically, I think the fundamental problem is that we offer options for this color field that can't be specified through the color picker, either CSS names or our that stuff. So I'm not really sure that there's. I think the best workaround would be for us to build our own color picker, basically, and then that new color picker could work reliably. But you'd lose, in the case of the Mac, the built-in color picker is actually quite nice and it's extensible. You can download modules that give you other tabs on this color picker. So.
Does the color picker still recognize the correct? So if you say red, when you invoke that color picker, does it shows black?
Yeah, like that.
Okay, so it's completely lost for what color is really being used. And where does it normally pick up the color from? Is it just pointed at the field next to it, or is it?
Yeah, it's the same. So both of these fields, both of these controls are tied to the same field of the same tiddler. So one's a normal text box and one's a HTML5 color input.
Okay.
Being driven by the same, they're tied to the same data bound.
Right. It seems like when retrieving from the tiddler field, then the color picker could be used if the value from the field could be mapped upon retrieval.
Yeah, but I think the easy worker. When you look at third-party sites, Facebook and so on, anything that lets you set a color, they almost never use the native color picker. That's partly because of poor support in, it's only the very modern browsers who have the color picker. And partly, I think, because they don't have enough control. So if you're Facebook, and then your instruction to change the color of your avatar, suddenly it becomes platform specific, because what happens when you click that button, is going to be different on Linux, Mac, and Windows. So I can see why people...
I see. I think the difference between Facebook and TiddlyWiki is that Facebook hired an engineer to be the color picker engineer, and they have a full-time guy who wrote that piece. And it's quite a complex and sophisticated interface. So yeah, building our own doesn't seem within the purview of our little group.
It's not mad though. I mean, you'll have seen endless jQuery color picker plugins, and they're quite interesting.
Oh, okay. Well, then finding one that somebody else has gone down that road on, and that does support, but ultimately it's still not going to support TiddlyWiki macro.
No, exactly. Well, it could work with the color macro. The ones that.
Because those do output an RGB code as their result.
Yeah,
so
it could sniff them. But anyway,
so you're just wikifying that field value as it's being retrieved.
Yeah, exactly. And so the way to reliably convert that into a color, in the browser, you can create a DOM node, assign that lot to it, and then read the color of it. I guess I'm not sure what the best. But it's all really, the fact that the color picker doesn't do that means really the color picker is the problem. That one of the things we've got to work around is that people may perfectly reasonably want to use 3-character color names. So I don't think to your point, the color picker is the right thing to use at the moment because it's kind of free. And it's not very invasive, it hasn't made the code any bigger or anything. But there's endless problems with it.
Well, it seems like whatever it does support, it seems like converting everything into a full 6-digit RGB to hand it to the color picker seems like the only way to make the color picker work reliably.
That's right. But using the color picker on this guy, what does that mean? So this is saying at the moment that community is set to muted foreground. So if I click on that color picker, it's not that helpful for me to see what if I click on the color picker, then I want to override that and specify the color directly instead of tying it to an existing field. So it's not even really, the behavior is not very clear.
Right, but it would be convenient if the color picker started with the actual macro-based color. Even if it is just a direct override and it's going to sort of unlink the.
Well, when you press edit, yes, I think what you're saying the same thing that we could replace the value of the field with the 6-digit hex value, and then be confident that it would work in the color picker.
But then you lose that linkage.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you don't replace it, but it's just sort of like a translation layer, if you will, upon retrieval or upon feeding it to the color picker. Yeah, it's still ugly.
So my suggestion was that we could add a div. Well, I won't try and do it now, but basically add a color swatch that's separate to the trigger for the color picker, and then actually probably hide the color picker DOM element and activate it through JavaScript when our color swatch is clicked. So of course that's the way to do it. We can completely do it. That's easy. So now.
Okay, so that addresses the
It addresses everything.
Well, no, it just
because it means they never see this color swatch that's here. Instead, we replace that with a div. We hide that, put a div in the same place. The div has its background set to the background color, so it's always going to display the correct color, even for FED and that guy. And
then when you click on it and bring up the color,
then we do a JavaScript click on the hidden color input, and then at that point, in this situation, so where it's set to color muted, whatchamacallit, when they would get gray as the preview, as the swatch, but when they bring up the picker, it would go to black. And similarly, when they go through to the picker, this guy, you'd get the same, you get the correct swatch. When you click through, you'd get black. So it'd still be problems, but it would be much less confusing.
When they click through, they would get black because the color picker is still tied directly to the field.
Yeah, to the FED.
What if you passed it the color value from the swatch?
Because, well, yeah, we'd need some mechanism for doing get computed style on the swatch. So the kind of problems there as well is it's, yeah, I mean it's.
And at least that would at least let the color picker start from the current value, even if afterwards it's going to be overwriting it with a plain RGB rather than a.
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose a better way to say it is it makes the color swatch accurate, but the color picker sticks with the current behavior.
It still would be an appropriate improvement over having the color swatch show as black.
Yeah, I think it probably would. Yeah.
So I think fixing the color swatch gives you a lot more feedback to figure out which colors are what, and that's very important. The color picker issue, as you pointed out, there are lots of plug-in color pickers that have different levels of capability, and at any time we could, as long as we keep the color picker logic isolated, very clearly, it should be something that's on the side, not integral, but that so you hand it off to something, it picks a color, and it gives you back an RGB. And which particular color picker we use, we can always revisit.
Yeah. I've just noticed. Okay, so I'm going to click done on that question and pick up the next one from mindprism, which is how to get an invite to the Hangout. And the answer is that you shouldn't need an invite. The URL that you need to join the Hangout is given here. So if you get to the event page, you should be able to click on that link and then join us in the Hangout itself. Does that make sense? So when I send an invitation, I send it to I've got a Google Plus circle called TiddlyWiki, and there's a Google Plus community called TiddlyWiki. So I send the invite to both of those, but you don't need to have received an invite in order to visit the event page, which I've now lost, and then to click on this link. So with the slight proviso that that's my understanding of how Google Hangouts works, and I've sometimes been wrong. I think that's what's going on.
There's several roads to Rome, as they say.
Yes.
And I receive an email invite to the Hangouts, and that's because I'm in one or both of those circles that you mentioned.
That's right.
So one answer to the question would be join those circles.
Yeah, so mindprism, I am putting you in my TiddlyWiki circle. You can see me doing that. That means that you will get subsequent invitations directly. But as I say, you can still get in even without being...
Now, the interesting question would be, and I'm not sure the answer because Google's usage here is very obscure, seems to be, but how does one request an invite without this sort of manual thing that you just did? Is there a way that someone can say, I want to be invited, let me know, and just get on the list without having you add it? Can someone join the TiddlyWiki community circle, for example?
Yeah, you can join the TiddlyWiki community circle is a way of getting the invite in the first place, yeah.
Without having you do anything about it.
But I don't think that Google actually has like a facility for doing that. I think the premise is that because the number of broadcasters is limited, and the idea is that generally, be sort of a speaker panel scenario. That the host of the broadcast is sort of given the opportunity to be selective about who's given that broadcaster link.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's basically for video podcasters more than it's for what we want, which is a sort of open meeting that we would like anybody to go. We'd like a moderator so we can kick out the bad guys, but we basically want an open meeting that anybody can join. Whereas Google Hangouts has this clear distinction between a viewer and a participant, and it seems as though it's all set up to get viewers rather than participants.
Except in their silly advertisement that I've watched 1,000 times, the one where the 5 people are hanging out and they're like, "What do you want to ping me about? We just pinged everything." Because they clearly are having a meeting of our style of meeting. And Google is definitely advertising that.
That would be a Google Hangout. What we're doing is a Google Hangout on air, and it's sort of classic Silicon Valley madness that those are different things. And the Google Hangout is a private meeting, and you don't get the recording to YouTube, whereas a Hangout on air is this kind of performance type.
Yes, I see the distinction. They should have just called it a Google podcast or
vidcast or something. Anyway, it's also, I just get very confused because it's all very separate and.
Yeah, here's the thing. Let's just to sort of to fully beat the dead horse on this topic. I receive an email. I don't always respond to it by clicking the yes button. So I don't always sort of get in the list as you are planning to attend. And then if I do, however, then I get my it's the Hangout's about to start thing gets into my email as well, and I can just click that to get right to the Hangout.
Right.
But what I usually do is go to the TiddlyWiki Google group and wait to see your posting.
Yeah,
which is
I do as well.
And that's something that you're doing manually to make that happen.
And that's the same URL that I'm sharing here. So basically, that's the URL to join the Hangout as a participant, and Google basically that's secret by default. So I have to push that out to let you guys join because they think I'm Joan Rivers making a chat show for you.
Ooh, I would not watch that one.
No, it was, I don't know why she was in my head. Somebody mentioned her in the last few days, and not positively. Right, so that's how you get an invite to the Hangout. Mindprism, I hope we'll see you in the Hangout shortly then. Next question. Mindprism says, yes, I'd like to participate. I have cool stuff to show. Great. People showing stuff is... other people other than me showing stuff is one of the most eternally popular parts of these Hangouts, so that's great. Very welcome to come and show stuff. And next question was from Mindprism, still about the color picker, pointing out that we could put a div over the picker that's invisible to mouse interaction and therefore have the picker and the proper color. Yes, indeed. And now, moving on, a question from Paolo. Tiny suggestions on how to use a tag from the drop-down list. After activating the tags list, it would be useful to be able to select the tag with the up and down keys instead of using the mouse. Now, the tab+enter keys also work, but requires many key presses. So, if it's not clear what Paolo's talking about, is indeed an incredibly annoying TiddlyWiki feature that I'd like to be able to go cursor down there, whereas the best I can do is tab my way into that list, and then I can select. Wow, but it's so confusing. I don't know if you can see when I'm using the cursor keys, it's moving the focus. When I'm using the tab, it's moving that focus. It's moving the selection for the cursor keys, and it's moving the focus for the tab key, and I'm confused. And of course, I think if I do return, it'll activate one of them, and space, activates the other one. Most confusing.
That kind of split between the selection and the focus inside of a drop list actually occurs in the regular old style drop lists as well, especially, or not necessarily drop lists, but a list box when they are multi-select especially.
Yeah.
Because that definitely makes a distinction between what's selected and what you're looking at to select at that moment, and it's a whole interactive, process of scrolling and arrowing, and then I think space to select, to toggle. So there's a whole keyboard thing, but most people don't use it. And most of the time, especially for single selections, the idea of selection and focus are bound together all the time.
Indeed, indeed.
But they're not always, and that's the point. Is that there is a sort of an extended usage of lists with a separate focus from selection. It's just like you said, most people find it confusing.
Yeah, and I think there's something very special about this situation of the drop-down that everybody asks for keyboard shortcuts there. There's lots of other bits of the user interface of TiddlyWiki where there is no keyboard shortcut support, but this is the one that everybody mentions.
Is there any support for using initial letters, typing in, alphabetical letters to...
Well, that restricts the list, yes. So that if I do this, each letter that I type restricts the list.
And I've always so once it's restricted, you can still tab into it then.
Yeah.
I've always kind of felt that the combo box widget was one of the greatest missteps in computing history. The interface paradigm in general is always problematic like this.
Yeah, I think yeah, and yeah, I mean what you're prompting is I think this part of the UI kind of looks the part, but the behavior isn't right. It's and yeah, I'd be well, it's an eternal topic that we keep coming back to, is redesigning the edit template. And in fact, for instance, making it so that there's an alternative way of doing this would be to be able to pull in a list of tags to the side that's kind of always there, and just a checkbox against each one with a search box at the top. So in other words, to avoid the autocomplete metaphor, because that's the thing that we can't really deliver on. It's pretty difficult with the way that we do things. If you're familiar with the mechanisms that cause the pop-up to appear when I focus that text box, for instance, it's all quite messy, intricate little bits of mechanism there, and yet the interface that I described that doesn't have a pop-up in quite the same way could be a lot clearer to navigate. And it also deals with something that people have asked about, which is being able to do this, selecting multiple things once you pulled the thing down.
Jeremy?
Hello?
From a layout standpoint, I greatly prefer to have the entire tag interface in a column on the right next to the fields for the title and the body and things of that sort. Especially because what I'm looking at here is it sort of has this lots of fiddly parts kind of feeling because of the way that the tag pills separate the title field and the input field, and there's prompt text here and there, and that I could definitely be more comfortable with a tag interface that was compacted, that was sort of folded in on the right with a sort of a button to expand it out and collapse it away.
So yeah, I think that's very plausible. This is one of the things I'd like to see happening, I guess, is a bit of experimentation around this. One could readily imagine a power user plugin whose main thing was a really turbocharged edit interface, with buttons and God knows what. But it's an area that's very easy to investigate, because obviously you just create a tiddler with the right name and it'll get picked up by the story as the edit template. So,
Is that alternative layout completely doable within the template?
well, the one that we just discussed, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
There's another. There's this ticket which we've looked at before, which is Matthias Goldman's contribution of some ideas. Yeah, we need to do more.
I kind of tend to agree with Eric. I mean, the tag input widget has always sort of felt to me like it's this sort of nesting of widgets within widgets within widgets, pretending to be a widget.
Yeah.
And that really kind of, feels to me like it wants to sort of be a frame of widgets as opposed to this sort of stack of widgety things pretending to be a widget.
Yeah, I think there's so some areas of the UI, the tabs, I'm quite happy with. They seem to me to be functionally as good as anybody else's tabs, so to speak. But yeah, this less so. Well, specifically, I mean, even the drop down here. So here we've got a combo box, and I think that's not terrible. It's okay. It's reasonably, I mean, it's not very clear how you get rid of the damn thing, but it's okay. But it's the combination here of that drop-down behavior on this text box along with the stacking up of the tags that seems, what's the word, inelegant. So, in answer to Paolo's question, there's a ticket number 143 from August of last year asking for the same thing. So noted. And I guess we could summarize the discussion as saying, actually, there's a lot more problems here than just the lack of keyboard shortcuts. We are all somewhat uncomfortable with the tag selection mechanism. Okay, so let's take next question from mindprism. There is another issue with that tag menu. When it is contained in a div that has overflow scroll or overflow hidden, it can be clipped to the container. It needs to be elevated in the DOM. Mindprism, that sounds interesting. I'm not sure that I fully understand the problem. Okay. Okay. So I think I'm with you now. So mindprism.
Now, in TiddlyWiki Classic, the use of pop-ups, the pop-up itself was a child of the window of the main document. And so that way it could ride above everything. But it became a little bit problematic because people also expected that the pop-up somehow belonged to the thing that its related button was living in. So when you have a tiddler that contained a button that would invoke a pop-up, they sort of felt like, oh, well, that was part of that pop-up. It's part of that tiddler. It should get certain influence of that div, that container, which is correct. But then, of course, it also would get clipped. So there was a sort of a duality of purpose to the pop-up, that you wanted to be sort of this global floaty thing, but at the same time you also wanted to acquire the styling and influence of the thing where the anchor for the pop-up is.
That's a completely correct summary. Yes. So let's just look at the problem that's being reported here. So that's how we can get a tag pill up. We render the tiddler associated with the tag through this template, and it's that displays us this nice little drop-down guy. And mindprism's observation is if we put it in a scrollable, so the scrollable widget is the thing that makes a region scrollable. when we do that, then the drop down gets clipped. So the reason for that is that if we look at the source, we've got that div with overflow auto, that's the scrollable element, and then inside it we've got both the button itself, and then hidden within this span we've got the actual drop down. So the drop down is a sibling of the button, and the reason for that is pretty much as Eric said. It means that the drop down inherits the same styles and everything as the button. So I think the issue here, I think to make that span, so this div has display block. Right, so we've got a position absolute here on the drop down. Yeah, I think I'm not sure that there is an easy solution to this.
It almost feels like this is more a deficiency with the scrollable widget or other similar widgets, not taking into account size changes for their content.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the scrollable widget's kind of doing what it should be doing. It's compacting all of that stuff in a little box and making it scroll through, I guess.
Well, it's very consistent. The problem is people have a mixed expectation. Like I said, they want the pop-up to inherit, but not everything.
Yeah. No, that's right.
You can't. That was the problem. That's why in TiddlyWiki Classic, pop-ups were done as a child of the document rather than as a sibling of the anchor button.
But I don't know if there's any magic CSS that we can do to get out of this. I mean, the thing obviously, the template that we're using, it puts the button and the drop down together, but actually they don't need to be together. They could be separate and put in separate parts of the DOM. So we could perfectly easily have the button within the scrollable and have the drop down outside it. Would work fine, and then it wouldn't be clipped. But obviously it would need a revised version of the current template.
Would that work though? Because then wouldn't the button, you could say you had a button and some content following it, and then you had and then
that's the state tiddler stuff that combines those two things together.
Well, no, I'm not saying that you can have them separated in the DOM, but I'm saying that then the button would scroll away while the pop-up would not.
Exactly. I mean, you'd
would
then
be sort of fixed below the scrolling area.
You'd need
which
to do
isn't
some
quite what you want either.
Exactly, to make it line up.
Because it wouldn't be below the button; it would be below the scrolling area.
I mean, it may be. I mean, of course, one of the good things about native controls is that they do the right thing. So, I mean, something I think we talked about this in the past, that we could take we could eat that click and then trigger a hidden select box that contained all the drop-down values. The downside is then we'd lose the icons and so on that we can show in here. But that may be the way to work around it, and then at least we get a proper, not that one, a proper browser native pop-up.
Now, on the one hand, I'm all for using browser native because that way each user gets their familiar name that they're working in, and there's no, head scratching about this Dropbox is a little different than their standard. But on the other hand, it also means then dealing with the vagaries of different platforms and how their native controls expect things to be done.
And the semantics are wrong, though. Although this is a list that one thing is selected in. So I mean that's not quite what we have here. So tricky. And I think mindprism, I don't have a good solution other than not using the off-the-shelf tag menu, but basically rolling your own. Okay, the next question from mindprism: can you post that join light, please? Not quite sure what mindprism's asking about there. The link for joining the Hangout is on the event page for TiddlyWiki Hangout 53. So, and that's the URL that I just tweeted and posted to the discussion group. The next, also from mindprism, there's no CSS solution for that. The inner div will always be clipped. Good, that is what I thought too, but it does mean that we don't have a good answer. Okay, question from Ton: tagging a tiddler with a system tag adds the tiddler as a tab, button, part, filter, macro, etc. But at the moment I don't see any practical use for $:tags image. Is the practical use, or is this tag only for internal use? So if I do a search across the code base, you'll see that we tag lots of our OS images. Lots of the UI images with tags image. And I'm pretty sure that the reason, yeah, that's why it's in the tag manager. That in the tag manager, we want to offer a menu of images that they can use with each tag. So here you can set the icon. So the images that are offered here, that was a bad example, wasn't it? Give it a small one. The images that are offered there are all images that are of type image, and images that are tagged image. So the reason why that happens is that if you look at something like this, this is the save button, and immediately we see it's an SVG image, but actually as far as TiddlyWiki is concerned, it's just a wikitext tiddler. So its type is not set to SVG. So this gets treated by TiddlyWiki just as if it was a block of wikitext. So it sees these SVG elements and just chucks them into the DOM. So that means that without that tag, there would be no way of knowing that this tiddler is actually an image. Does that make sense, Ton? So by using that tag, that lets us include these useful images in the image dropdown, even though they are actually wikitext tiddlers that you transclude rather than being real images like these JPEGs and SVGs are. Does that make sense, Tom?
Yes, it does. So now I can add it to my customization guide.
Good. Okay, so now let's click done on that. There was the next topic I had was raised by Matabele. So I think you can still see my screen. Discussion with respect to the limitations of button widget messaging in Hangout 52. I've been investigating the idea of stacking widgets around a button widget and linking them together with widget messages. The widgets may be found at gwiz.tiddlyspot.com. The approach appears to be working out well and has several advantages. Each widget is simple, intelligent choice of defaults as possible, avoids unnecessary complexity in the parameters to the button widget. Resulting buttons can carry out quite complex user actions. So what the approach that Matabele is talking about is the way that we have I'm trying to see if we can see an example, introduction stacked widgets. It's the idea that you have a button in the middle surrounded by a stack of widgets that respond to the message sent by that button. So this one sends a set field message, and the closest ancestor set field widget picks up that set field message, and then I think it's specifying the value of a particular field, but then the set field message falls through to the next set field widget. So this is a way, the example you see here of having a single button that sets two different fields to two different values. So I think what Matabele, who I think is really called Will, is asking is that a good technique? And the answer to that is a resounding yes. And the points that Will raises are, I think, right, that this is an aspect of what we're really aiming for with TiddlyWiki, small primitives that can be joined together to perform more complex jobs. Several of the existing widgets have a good deal of sort of special behavior that I would like to see over time, us refactoring the widgets to be simpler, smaller, and fit together in combination to give us the functionality that we need. Further, the particular mechanism, but the particular thing that Will's doing here, taking advantage of the message passing mechanism, is awesome. That's, again, what TiddlyWiki tries to do all over the place, is introduce a mechanism to solve a problem and then to relentlessly try to use that mechanism to solve all of the related problems that look the same shape. So reusing the message mechanism, absolutely the right thing to do. When I look at this stuff, what it actually makes me think a bit is this is fine for a widget structure, but we maybe need wikitext syntax that makes some of this easier to write, easier to express. But this certainly hits it in conceptual simplicity, I suppose, is what I'm saying, that this is beautifully conceptually simple, fitting together these bits. The only sense in which it's not beautiful is there's a lot of typing involved, but we can trivially fix that. So,
Jeremy?
Hi.
Yeah, someone joined.
Mark. So let's just click through to Mark's profile. Mark, are you here for TiddlyWiki? I don't know if Mark can type into the chat window. Mark, I think you're in group chat. Can you? Oh, great. Yeah, you're here for TiddlyWiki. Great. I shall let you through and perhaps just oh, mindprism. Great, Mark. Well, hello. Have you got a mic as well? I was, funny enough, thinking about this afternoon. One of the odd complexities that I have to deal with is how people...
Am I live?
Mark, hello, you're here.
Hey.
You're by the Humber Bridge. Is that the Humber Bridge?
I think it's a Mackinac. I'm not sure. No, I guess not. Nope.
Well, glad you managed to make us to get in. I was just remarking on the way that individuals who pop up in the group and on GitHub and on here often have different names for all of those places, so I frequently don't know that such and such a person is the same as mindprism, etc. But Mark, we answered a whole slew of your observations there. Anything to say about any of that? Any other comments?
No, it was pretty much as I expected. I was just wondering how much, what the reasons were behind some of that, the containment of that and why it wouldn't be done on the body or whatever.
I mean, I think stepping out to give you a sort of even wider answer, one of the things that TiddlyWiki 5 does that I was really uncertain whether it was possible when I started was to build the entire user interface out of these simple wikitext primitives. So there's things like the reveal widget, for instance, a key one, and the button widget that are used in combination to give us things like tabs, but also things like these drop downs and so on. And I'm really delighted by the degree to which this entire, relatively rich user interface is rendered entirely through wikitext. But it does mean that in a few places we've got slightly funky UI widgets that just don't quite have the expected behavior. And yeah, it's a kind of, I guess I'm happy because the real challenge, I think, was to build a user interface where all the state is contained in tiddlers and where every change that happens to the screen happens because of a tiddler value changing, triggering a bound DOM element to change. So I think all that stuff's really cool, and what we're wrestling through here is, I think, some of the rough edges and some of the consequences of those decisions. Yeah, and I'm pretty confident we can fix that kind of stuff.
Yeah, great.
So let's move to. Oh, we were still on Will's widget stacking approach, and so I was responding to. I mean, again, Will's one of the people who's done a vast amount of work on exploring the edges of TiddlyWiki. I think here developing it's kind of, this is the emergence of conventions really, which is very helpful to me because when you see this stuff, it helps me to see what point I made before, which bits might need to be made into wikitext syntax so that they can be written more concisely. But it's great stuff. Couldn't be more pleased. Now, I've been thinking about similar stuff, and I think maybe we touched on this last week. No, 5 days ago. Did we talk about this last week? I think we did. But it's this is an exploration in much the same area, but it's framed slightly differently. That the one way of looking at the issue is the button that generates a message. At the moment, the message has a name. There's a string identifying the message, and then there's a single string parameter. But in several cases, we would like to be able to pass richer parameters with these messages. For instance, specifying template values for certain fields when we do a new tiddler message. So one of the approaches I was looking at, gosh, I don't know this. It's very well. Have a look at this one, where we've got a button widget, and then inside it a number of separate action widgets. And the idea is that when the button is when the button's rendered, those action widgets wouldn't, they'd be inert. They wouldn't appear in the DOM. You just get button with click me on it. And then when the button's activated, it would run through each of those actions in sequence. And then we get to reuse the attribute syntax to give us a reasonably flexible way of specifying the parameter for each action. So it's very different. It's a very different approach, particularly because buttons don't just send messages. They also do things like set tiddler values and trigger pop-ups, which obviously that's outside of the message paradigm. So yeah, this is an area where I don't want to, there's no reason to hold up the process of getting out a beta for this, because this is the kind of second order improvement that I think comes from us having lived with the existing design for a year or so, and starting to see where it's going to be worth putting some effort in. And I think when I thinking about that in relation to the work here, I think what this is inviting me to do is to think, well, can the other things that buttons do be recast so that they are also message-based, so that we can use this message fall through as the way. But one issue with that is things like here, it's fairly clear that the way that messages work implies that that set field widget is going to be triggered before that set field widget, because the one closer to the button widget is going to receive the message first. So that's slightly problematic, that we've got here, we've got something that looks an awful lot like a little bit of a procedural program saying do this, then that, then this, then that. But the fact that it's in completely reverse order is guaranteed to trip up anybody who falls into the trap of seeing it as being a procedural thing. So I would say all that topic is in, all that stuff is, this is in the area of stuff that really needs thinking about. Seeing Will's doing this work, you know, means that it's not just me that's thinking about it, which is, that's pretty profound, because that hopefully will keep things moving nice and quickly. I don't know if anybody, did anybody see the stories tab here as well? Really nice. That got a nice way of selecting a named subset of tiddlers, and then all of those tiddlers appear, and a way that I can create a new so if I open a tiddler or two, bang, and then I'll save a snapshot called Jeremy, and then I can do things like go to the introduction snapshot, back to the Jeremy snapshot. Pretty neat, I think. Not quite sure. What's that do? Ah, that shows everything with a particular tag. Okay. Pretty nice.
Yeah, that is kind of handy.
Isn't it? Isn't it? It seems like it's... Well, I'm really pleased. The reuse of the select widget, and especially going back to what we were saying about keyboard shortcuts and everything, that's really nice that I can trigger that with keyboard shortcuts. And also this idea that a story becomes an entity, becomes a thing that you can talk about, point to. I really like that, and I'm sure I've gone on about it before here. That for me, the idea of a TiddlyWiki as a bag of tiddlers that can be joined simultaneously into lots of different stories for different audiences. I really, really, really love that, and that, you know, it's that element of hypertext that transcends really the old, you know, prehistoric idea of you know, of a narrative, which is very exciting. Okay, so now I think I had the next thing we could do is just show you a couple of things that have been added to in the last week, and then perhaps talk a little about the conference that I went to on Friday, which was one of the reasons why I didn't do so much TiddlyWiki work in the last week. So let me switch to a clean build. So one of the things that was, it's another example of something prompted by the group. So somebody sent a message to the group saying, "Eek, the release history tiddler is ridiculous." Only they were too polite to phrase it like that. And just to show how ridiculous it is, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 screenfuls at Jeremy's screen size of stuff, which is a ridiculously hard to manage tiddler. So I put them into vertical tabs. Really pleased with the result. I mean, it obviously doesn't print so well, but seems like a really nice way of navigating through data items that are naturally in a one-dimensional list. In order to do it, I had to do some further upgrades to the tabs macro as well. So now there's an additional template parameter that allows you to, in the case of in the release history, the template points to release history template, and release history template, is it in recent? No, I'll have to search for it the hard way. So the release history template, very classic sort of thing, just has a heading, pulls out the release date, and then transcludes the body. And each tab is viewed through that template, so that's what gives us that stuff at the top and bottom. So that's cool. Pleased with that. Any comments about it?
Jeremy, I was just thinking that the combination of horizontal and vertical tabs could be used to make something very similar to the tag grid that I had hooked up a while ago. you could have all the tags listed on the top tags, top.
Yeah.
And then the same tags listed down the side, and then as you select a horizontal tab and a vertical tab, you would get the content would be the links to tiddlers that have both tags.
Yeah. Well, I'd encourage you to get that done, Eric. What else did we have? This is a subtle one. So there was a question in the group from somebody who essentially wanted to customize this tiddler. So previously, this tiddler didn't have that or that in it. It just looked like this. So it's got a section with the class story river, and then we use the list widget to render the story list through our edit template and our view template. What I've added is the same structure as we see endlessly, is a filter to bring in this case, tiddlers tagged tag story backdrop, and to transclude them, and here story front drop. So what it lets you do is add chunks of text to the top or bottom of the story column. If I've got one lined up here, so if I save this in the TW5 edition, gosh, it started summer rain here of the most epic kind. It's like a tropical. So we've got a tiddler called story backdrop, tagged story backdrop with some stuff in it, and if I build that and scroll up, you can see now there's this stuff it's inside the story column. And so if I, well, that was a bad example, but it takes the width of the story column. So what was that one called? So that's just give it a bit more text. Okay, so there you can see now if I do that, hide the sidebar, you can see how this chunk is resizing with the story column. So the reason why I was interested in this was I'm still struggling with what tiddlywiki.com should be, and I would like tiddlywiki.com to, for a casual user who jumps to tiddlywiki.com for the first time, for it to be much more like a conventional website that says, here's TiddlyWiki, it can do these amazing things for you. But it says all of that without being quite so obviously a TiddlyWiki. So one way of doing that would be for essentially the entire content of the website to be in that backdrop place. When I click on a link, then for the tiddler to open somehow, maybe below if it's a short enough chunk. Anyway, so I was just doing that. I was just experimenting and playing around with the degree to which we could basically put all the TiddlyWiki functionality behind a button or two and have a much simpler end user experience. And then there was a message on the group which was expressed slightly differently. It was expressed as, if I override this tiddler, is there a way that I can then reference and include the original content of this tiddler? And there is no mechanism for that. Once an overridden shadow tiddler is completely inaccessible in TiddlyWiki at the moment. But then when I asked more about what he was trying to achieve, it was basically to add a div here, and he wanted it to be within that story river. So this mechanism is a way to give them that. So I don't know, it's sort of possibly, it's the sort of customization that allows people to, what's the word, to make things that don't look and feel like a TiddlyWiki. It's quite deep customization. The concern I have now is whether we're going to end up with too many system tags. So I've added them here, but these guys, which ones? quite a few of these are basically providing a means to insert things into the DOM, into the render tree at different points. My worry is that people's needs for what they might need to put where, you know, I want to put some components here, I want to put some components here, might mean that we end up with, you know, 24 of these system tags, which then I start to worry whether we've anticipated the best, most correct, most useful splicing points, which is basically what these tags represent. They're the places where other users can splice new functionality into TiddlyWiki. But anyway, at the moment, it's not too ridiculous a list, and I'm not too threatened by it. I made a change that I've been threatening to for a while as well, that these, I needed to add a theme tweak. So the theme tweak is the sidebar breakpoint. So the issue is that previously with tiddlywiki.com, when as you resize, as you know, it flips into mobile phone mode where the sidebar is at the top. The issue is that the cutoff point is actually here. It's where the screen gets essentially wider than the story column, story river. And then at that point, even though there's actually no bloody room for it, we say, let's have a sidebar. So really, the cutoff point should be more like here, which is unrelated. Well, it's an increment on top of the width of the story column. So to fix that, had to introduce, as I say, a new magic number. And now there you can see that the cutoff point is there, just as we get to the point where the sidebar is a little bit too narrow to be useful. But in the process of doing this, I also reversed an earlier decision, which was, I think, wrong, where all of these values were indexes within a single metrics tiddler. So that meant that if you modified any of these, then it duplicated the entire tiddler. That then means that if I come along and add a new value, it's not in your duplicated copy of that tiddler. So now we've made these things be individual tiddlers, which makes them much easier to manage and makes them independent. So I also got rid of the necessity for what do you call things, backticks as well. We had an interesting bug with Firefox when it took me ages to figure out how you turn off cookies in Firefox, but if you turn off cookies, it also disables local storage, which I suppose local storage is a bit like a cookie, but I must say I don't think it's much like a cookie because it doesn't pass information to the other side. But that was raising an error, so we've fixed that. And oh yeah, one other change was problem that gets discussed in the group fairly frequently, the burgeoning size of the HistoryList tiddler. So now we've added the HistoryList tiddler to the save filter, so it's not included when we save changes. So that hopefully should reduce the number of people experiencing ridiculously inflated file sizes. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. There's a few more bug fixes. And I've been playing around with improving the animation easings. So you probably can't notice much difference, but the zoom in animation now slows in and slows out in a way that's slightly smoother, and I think feels a little bit speedier to me. So that's recent changes to 5.014, and the plan remains I think last week when we were talking about 5.14, I was explaining, I think, why I wasn't planning to do the parser refactoring, The big area for this release remains, I think, the plugin library and the upgrade process that I'm perceiving now as being the real obstacles to going to beta. To getting out of beta. Okay, so now I was going to just quickly talk about the Indie Tech Summit. So I went to this on Friday last week. It's organized by this guy, Aral, Balkan, who is the originator of the Indie Phone project, which is an attempt to create a phone that respects its users by not being a device for surveillance. And that project, it is running ahead, but in the process, I think that Aral came up with this kind of what he calls a manifesto, a kind of set of beliefs that have driven him to produce the Indie Phone, but he's now offering these as a broader manifesto for what he calls independent technology. And he has a very clear set of beliefs. So he's quite hard-edged about thinking that surveillance is bad, that the bargain by which we gain free services by selling by giving away our personal data, he thinks that's bad. He's fairly down on funding, on investment, on having investors, because of the expectation that investors will want an exit, and because of the way that exits these days tend to be to the big surveillance silos that he's fighting against. So there's a very clear but quite extreme view of the world and of privacy and rights and so on. And then in terms of what to do about it, he emphasizes independence, sustainability, and design-led. And it's in that design area that I think I have a bit of difference of opinion, that in the day, the summit, if you look here at the tracks, you'll see that a lot of it came under the heading of design. So there's a bit about independence with Richard Stallman, which was brilliant and hilarious, and then part one about design, and back here part two about design. Now, and Aral is clear at saying design is not how it looks, it's how it works. And yet the majority of the designers, I think, were actually visual designers in practice. And yet what happened in the day was the clear emergence of the idea that whatever it is that we can do to improve the situation requires not just technical work and design work, but crucially requires development of new business models, and that the real forum for innovation is what kind of business models can we make work in the future. From my perspective, being CTO of a startup now compared to 15 years ago, I'm very optimistic about alternative business models, because the cost base for running a startup has just changed beyond all recognition. Running a startup used to be fairly capital intensive, buying servers and so on, whereas now almost everything that you need to make a business in terms of facilities and so on is available on demand, and you don't have any of that upfront capital expenditure. So what I'm pointing out there is that there is a sort of a disconnect that I knew going into the day, that the issue is really about business models. How do you make a sustainable business? But that in fact the day was much more predicated on the trouble with open stuff so far is that the user interface has been terrible. We've got to take a holistic approach, and we've got to compete for user interface quality with the off-the-shelf consumer products. So one of the things that Aral says is that people should buy the Indie Phone because it's the best phone, not because sort of out of pity because they think it's the politest phone or the most respectful phone. There was also a lot of us there, I think, from the school of thought that distributed, decentralized, federated tools are preferable to the big centralized tools. So I guess a theme was that the Google is evil or Google behaves evil idea partly stems from its size and the vast concentration of exciting, valuable data within it. And that's cool. And I'm really, I love the federation. That's why my company is called Federational, is because I'm interested in federation. However, I notice that all of the systems products that we've built in the past that are decentralized, federated, etc., have terrible user experiences. So email is a federated system, and email, although we're used to it, has a fundamentally messed up user interface where I can't, as a sender of an email, I can't even be certain that once I've sent it, that my email is going to be delivered. So that the complexity of things like read receipts and notifications are entirely down to the decentralized way that email is routed. Or Usenet, for that matter, is a decentralized service. And again, its user interface often requires you to be aware of that in order to understand why you can't see that person's post, that kind of thing. Or another decentralized system, I guess, would be BitTorrent. And the user experience of BitTorrent is kind of poor in the sense you download something and you don't know whether it is what you think you're going to get. And to a certain extent, that aspect of the poor user interface is also because it's decentralized. You're not getting your content from an authoritative source. You're just getting it from somebody who thinks they've got it. So what I'm saying there is I think there are real design challenges around designing decentralized products. I think it's the reason why the world is full of these centralized systems is because they're kind of easier to build. They're expensive to build and scale, but they're easier to build than the decentralized ones. Their failure modes are simpler and easier to understand. And that the complexity that you take on board by moving from a centralized to a decentralized architecture, I think, is considerable. It's a factor of 10 complexity or something. And it is not clear to me that the tools that we use, whether we think of ourselves as visual designers or user interface designers, to bring clarity to a conventional user interface challenge, which is about information hierarchy and so on. I'm not sure that those tools can help us in making user interfaces that reflect these decentralized systems. So very, very cool to have met a number of people who are share many of the same kind of perspectives as we do. So I think I drew attention to this last week in the the shout-outs bit in the slides I did at the InnoQ conference. So there were people from the Indie Webcamp movement. There was guys from Hoodie there. There was several people who were talking about this stuff, several people talking about that stuff. So it was really cool to feel that we are part of a community that's developing the language to care about things like independence and control and so on. I discovered in the process that one of the speakers is a guy who hopefully you've heard of, Danny O'Brien from the EFF, who turns out to be an ardent TiddlyWiki user, been running his life on it. I think actually he's not using it right now, but has been running his life on it for 5 years. And that's cool. Actually, also Doug Belshaw from Mozilla, same deal. He's has been using TiddlyWiki to run his life. So that's kind of encouraging that we've got big picture people sharing our view of the human race being better off if people have the capability to use technology independently of any corporation. And we've got nice reference points of people in the community who care about TiddlyWiki as well. So that's good. I think that with any luck, there'll be more over the next year or so. I think we'll start to see more conference-y type activity around this, because it's clear that there is a community here, but I don't think it's very clear who should lead it. And in many ways, Aral might not be the best person to lead it any more than I would be, because he's got a thing that he's pitching. You know, he's invested in the debate. He's not just a person who's posing questions and helping us to classify the answers. He's got a bunch of answers himself, as I do, which means, you know, he's at his strongest and most impressive, I think, when he's talking about his own stuff, and that's you know, that's not really fitting necessarily for somebody who's got this role of you know, helping to frame, shape, host the debate, which, to say, is also something that's going on there. Yeah, so fun, reassuring. It's the conference I've been to with the most best gender balance recently. Somebody tweeted hilariously how pleased they were to be at a conference where there was a queue for the ladies' loo, and it's hard not to be sympathetic to that. That's pretty cool. So, but that's me on Indie Tech Summit. Any questions or comments? It's kind of, did I show you this? He's in doing the manifesto, he's got a kind of mini TiddlyWiki thing going on. So he wants some of these words and phrases. Hello?
Yes, Nathan's rejoined.
Thanks, Eric. So just pointing out that he's got the same kind of information disclosure-y thing as TiddlyWiki, you know, offering you more information and then showing it to you in line. But it's kind of, well, I don't know. What do you think? It feels to me. Well, I mean, look, when I clicked on this, what opens is a thing that's sort of 3 pages long. It's actually bigger, I think, than the document that it was opened within. So that didn't quite meet my expectations. I was expecting the things that open up to be more like footnotes or something, whereas in fact the things that open up are more like fully fledged self-contained documents. But I think it would be good to. I'd like to put my name to a manifesto that that does a good job of reflecting my views, and yeah, I think I would use TiddlyWiki to build it. And I think this shows that something I've always said about manifestos are a perfect application of TiddlyWiki, because they have this need to, in order to function well as a manifesto at the top level, you need a very short, pithy rationale for what you're trying to say, and then obviously there are lots of details that you care about and that you want to make sure that you unambiguously state, and I think TiddlyWiki's unfolding nature makes it quite suitable for that. And skinny fonts, it's all about the skinny fonts. Now, just picking up on, oh yes, so Mark's got some demos. We should do that next. Are you, Mark? Would you be ready to kick off?
Yeah. Give me a moment here. I'll see how I do with the screen share.
Ah, yes, the complexities of that.
I'm new at this. I just started.
We all are, Mark, and the thing is, they change it every week anyway. So you think you learn where some button is to do something, and then it's a different color and move the following week.
Let's try this here.
And I think you're right. Web workers don't work on file URIs.
Yeah, there's the window messaging stuff that's supposed to sort of compensate for some of those limitations, but it really only goes so far and just adds further complexity to the whole situation.
Can you see any of my screen?
Oh, I think it I think it's trying. Oh, I can see your cursor. I can see your white cursor on a black screen.
Yep.
That's hilarious.
Nothing else.
No, oh, and then something flashed up. So some hover effects are kind of coming through. I think the places where your screen is repainting are coming through.
Okay, hold on. Let's try a different tab.
I don't know if it makes any difference. So when I do it, I tend to share the whole screen rather than an individual window. But
Yeah, let me give it another shot.
it looks quite psychedelic in between.
Okay. Full screen 2. All right. Doom.
Here we go.
Got something? All right.
Yeah.
I hope it's not too dark for you. This
is how you use your computer all the time with this theme?
With what?
I mean, what I'm seeing is blue text on a black background. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, it's basically I do most of my work at night, so it's really dark. I hope it's not too much of a problem for you to see.
Not at all. It's fascinating. I'm really interested, and it makes me think that we should have a proper dark theme built in, a nighttime theme.
Yeah, it's I was worried about maybe I could do a hue rotate for you and bring it up to light, but I think it would be better if you can see it fine to do it this way.
Yeah, that's fine. And it's, I mean, as ever, the reason why this stuff is so interesting is because we get an insight into how individuals use TiddlyWiki, and this kind of customization is the kind of thing I wouldn't normally see.
Yeah.
Gosh, and you've got quite funky ticks on your tabs.
Yeah, I've got, what I did is I started, about a couple years ago, I heard about TiddlyWiki Classic and I messed around with it a little bit. Then about a month ago, I got back into it, found out about TiddlyWiki 5, and have been hammering on it for about a month. And so I want to show you where I was at as far as what I'm doing. The first thing, let's see. The first thing I'm trying to do is trying to make it all keyboard accessible to the nth degree, and because that's what I find so aggravating about web applications is you can't skate through, and work like a normal app. So I got a lot of key stuff hooked up here, but let me just show you the UI. In the river, I've got this green box here. That's like a floating current cursor. So if I scroll down here, it'll switch to whichever one's mostly in the window, and then you'll notice too I've got my headers stick.
And are you using position sticky for those features?
No, I'm not. This is most of my stuff I've done as an overlay in jQuery, since that's what I'm familiar with.
Okay. And
so I've dug into your navigator widget and got an idea of how basically the guts of the core story works and how to do things like that. So what I've got is, for instance, to create a new tiddler, I just hit insert enter, and it creates a new tiddler, and then I'm jumping in whenever I find something dissatisfactory. I jump in and do an overlay with it. And so the first thing I do is, like, if it's a new tiddler, I set the focus on the header, select the header, and then on the body, what I've also got is whatever the cursor position is getting stuck in local storage.
Yeah.
So if I open this back up again, my cursor position can be restored. Okay. And then I've got this little easy tags pop out. So I can click tags from there. And I've also got my tag engine, which I'm pretty proud of. What this does is I wasn't happy with this drop-down thing, and I've got these behaving like this, so it's in a scrollable. Okay, to add tags there. but my tag engine, it's got its own little language. So it interprets 1, 2, 3. It interprets whichever. It uses a hierarchy of delimiters to interpret which delimiter you're using. Okay, so there's 1, 2, 3. If I want to get rid of them, I just do 3 dashes and it'll take them away. But if I want 1, 2, comma 3, it does what you expect. And then if I've got a deleter, so you'll notice the tags have a little suffix number on them.
Mm-hmm.
I can reference those, so I can say delete tag 2. Oops. I can say delete tag 2 and add another tag called 4. Okay, let me use 4 and a space. Okay, so here, let me, okay, that should work. And so not only I've got also within the syntax of that, whatever you're typing in there, it has pushes and pops. So I can push a value to a certain spot. Say I want to push 1. I push that to the 1 spot. Whoops, 1. Oh, the cursor keeps. Hold on, I should get rid of everything but the one I'm working on.
Yes, I know that feeling.
Okay. Okay, so that will push the word 1 into the 1 spot, and then I can bring it back anytime by using the caret. Okay, and so whatever you push, there's 10 slots, or I can use the caret alone just to bring back the last tag. So if I say 5 and then the last tag -6, it will push a 5 and bring. So I got a prefixing mechanism, and then also there's an aliasing mechanism where the aliases will put in local storage, and so they can be used, across. Because everything you do here with the pushing and popping is just for that one statement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then what else do I got here? I've got a bookmark button, which basically just adds a tag BM here. But then also, I have to get my screen fixed here. Oops, wrong thing. Okay, one moment. Okay, so the bookmark just adds a BM tag, and then over here I've got my list of bookmarks that comes out from this. This is all on CSS display. So I've got all the listing with a bookmark, and if I want to unbookmark one, I can just uncheck it here. Then while like you'll notice, if I go here, it gives a focus indicator here. If I escape out of that, we get a focus indicator for the river, and while I'm in the river, if I'm not editing anything, you'll notice that every tiddler has this prefix of a number.
Mm-hmm.
So these prefixes, the prefixes will go up to Z. They'll go through 0 through 9 and then up to Z. So if the river has the focus and nothing else, I'm not editing or anything, I can just hit that number and go right to the tiddler. Okay. Then what I have in my open is in all my searches, I got this little dynamic thing that changes so that you can see the filter syntax of what you're doing. Okay, and right now, J, I'll just type in J, and so you can see the filter syntax. And I'm using a filter on here called QKey, which I made, which does a match, basically whatever letters, if they appear in the same order, but doesn't matter what happens in between them, it'll match and rank according to weight of how strongly the item matched. Then back out of there. As soon as you focus over here, you get this other cursor, the green cursor, and I can just go down arrow through these, and it'll bring into focus that one. Also, if I control space this, it'll select it for later things to do. If I hit any of my keys that correspond to the typical buttons here, all of these have been assigned a key, which will show up on hover. So what I'm trying to do is make it show as best as possible the keystrokes that you need to know or do at any particular time, and have you do it. The other thing these things do is they have a little fly out here that has the proper toolbar for that button, for that tiddler.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and so like right now, I just did a major refactor, so I'm not sure how much of the stuff will work, but I want to uncheck these just to make sure it will work. Wherever my cursor is, if I hit the typical F2 key, it should go into edit mode but it didn't. Yeah, so I could show you. I didn't show you all of the syntax for the tag thing, but what I want to do is carry that across and make this kind of like a super filter, so that if you're entering of letters, then it'll do a fuzzy match. But if you suffix that combination of letters with a particular funky character, then it'll operate differently. Okay, so it'll do an exact match or do a match from the beginning or end, that kind of thing, which would basically follow how the tags will work right now. Oh, the other thing with tags is I can put a question mark before a tag, and it won't create that tag unless it exists. Okay.
Okay.
So if you put in a big string of whatever tag making specification, and then whatever tags that you question mark, and if they don't exist, what'll happen is you'll get the input box will be filled with the tags that don't exist in a syntax that would make them exist if you hit enter again.
Right.
Right. And so the other thing about the tag thing is that when you're asking for a tag to delete is the only time you're kind of like using search masks or using these characters on the end. So I can say delete blah, 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 and then end it with a caret, and it delete all tags that are on that tiddler that begin with that expression. Stuff like that.
By the way, Mark, I noticed you're on 5.09 at the moment.
Yeah, I'm on 5.09 because I went to download a higher version and then was looking at graphing plugin, and it didn't work with the higher version. So I jumped off the higher version because I want to use a graphing, going to end up using something extraneous to a widget in doing that. Like I want to probably just there's a graph out there. It's done by it's an open source thing, and it's funded by the government, but it's really nice. Works kind of like jQuery as far as simplicity goes. It has a nice a demo page where if you walk down the demo page, it'll give you a nice demo for each, a live active demo for each of the type of syntaxes they're talking about. But it would be nice to have. Oh, and this is the other. I've done so much stuff I forgot what I've done. And then, so like I said, I'm using jQuery and jQuery UI, which will give me this drag and drop reordering. So I can reorder these, and then I can go on my Open tab, and right now my feedback mechanism working, put these in the same order as the river, but also I can reorder from here too, and it will put the river in the right order from here, and that'll resort the river. The other thing I did was put in these layout mechanisms. So I can go one with no sidebar, or 2 columns with no sidebar, or I can put in a tile height. So if I want tiles to be, each tiddler to be 100% of the window, or 50% or 33%, or their normal size. So I put in 50%, and that'll expand each one so that they're all basically 50%.
That's fascinating.
And you'll notice I've got I changed the header mechanism so you get a full normal looking header on an edit tiddler. I think that's about the major points of what I've done. I've got about 8,000 lines of code. That's not including the CSS of this, and so it's pretty much mapped out all the things I want to do. All I have to do is transpose the code over into each of these different, whenever I have a list, then I'm going to want some common behavior in here that's easily transported over.
And so the way that you're doing the jQuery extensions is what you're looking for DOM elements being created with certain characteristics and then adding to them?
Right. What I do is, like, I try to avoid a polling mechanism because that's, so what I try to do is to make it event-driven as possible. So I'm watching element created and element destroyed, and also hooking on clicks whenever I need to. The one thing I did find was that I cannot, on a normal tiddler link, like in the open dialog, I cannot make it activate in jQuery. I tried clicking it. I tried, programmatically clicking it, or mouse downing it, or mouse upping it, and so I have to work around there and do whatever. But yeah, basically it's pulling the DOM and where I have to, and watching everything. So it's kind of like an overlay system. Like when I'm rearranging, the tiddlers in the river, I'm not actually messing with the story list or anything like that.
Yeah, no, very interesting. On that point about not being able to track link widgets, don't quite understand why, because it does just create a anchor element with a click handler. So you just thought simulating the click would get you here. I'm a little surprised by that. Well,
yeah.
So I mean, first thing about the version number thing, is it the JSX widget? Is that the one that you were interested in? That's the only visualization library I'm aware of that's been pluginized.
Yeah, that's probably it.
Well, I'm very confident that we can fix it for subsequent versions. As I recall, I think we looked at a previous Hangout, and there's one API that changed in, I don't know, 5.13 or something, or 12 probably actually, that needs to be changed to make the JSX widget work again. It's very undesirable. It's very bad for me to see you on such an old version. Because it immediately raises the concerns that inadvertently I might have done things that prevent, the work that you've done here from working in 13. The functionality that you've attained, a lot of it is things that would be, lots of people would be interested in, and a lot of it is things that I'm hoping that the core will do, but the core will do, it'll take a bit longer to get there because it won't be using the same approach. So I think it would be awesome if you could share your stuff, and we need to get you on the latest version to do that, I think.
Yeah, I don't think it. I could transition easily to a newer version because the way I'm doing everything is hairy to begin with. Yeah. Then you pretty much have to. Yeah, this is the graph widget, which is just being swamped right now.
Right. Yeah.
It's crashed the page. Yeah. I'll probably do that, but basically I've got everything set up so that I could probably plug and play into the newer version without too much stuff. The only thing I did was I went down into things like the navigator and a few other places and put in a pub sub system so I know when certain things are happening down there. And so that's pretty much my only injection points into whatever if I had to switch over to a new thing.
So I noticed that's on TiddlySpot. Is it a private, password protected wiki on TiddlySpot?
Yeah, it's private. Yeah.
And how many different wikis do you use in your, not for development, if you see what I mean, but in terms of actually using it? Is everything that you do in one super wiki?
None right now. I'm just messing with, getting one to be what I want it to be.
Right.
And then. But basically, I see this as, it really is the concept and the core of TiddlyWiki is, on par with a killer app. It's doing something that's not been done, and now that we've got the browsers up to par, it can go a long way. It's really. So I'm looking at what you have to do to make people pick up on it.
Right, it's very interesting. Yes.
Yeah.
I hold that thought. I was just gonna add that I think I appreciate that you had earlier experience with TiddlyWiki Classic, but I think what you've been able to achieve in a month in terms of understanding how TiddlyWiki works, what it's trying to do, being able to hack on it like that is amazing. Because one of my big worries about TiddlyWiki is that I've inadvertently made something that's, complicated and arbitrary and strange, just like the inside of my head, and that by asking other people to use TiddlyWiki, I'm actually asking them to step inside my head, and that, in fact, the level of complexity and everything in it might not be suitable for other people. So I'm very reassured by you're one of a few people who've come through being able to apply, conventional knowledge of web applications, jQuery, etc., to TiddlyWiki. So quite a cool result for me that you've shown that the thing is tractable to a new person, and that particularly, I think, showing that it's possible for somebody to get to grips with TiddlyWiki and customize the hell out of it beyond anything that anybody else has seen in a month is pretty shocking, actually.
Yeah.
But and I think you were going to say, how do we get other people to see it? And that's absolutely my favorite conversation at the moment.
Yeah, I've listened to, I sit here and work on this while I've listened to all your Hangouts. I've listened to them all probably twice.
Good Lord. Good
And
Lord.
and so when you talk about having the like the getting things done classic version.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you talk about that as having a turnkey TiddlyWiki, that's what we need to get the everyday person has to have all those bells and whistles. It's all built in, and they'll have to think about it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then that's exactly the notion of editions, and I think now we don't do. I mean, the right mechanism is there, but I don't think we expose it in the right way. But the idea was to have a number of pre-canned editions that we would make available with a single click, and that an edition. The thing I really like is, although one thinks of editions as being customized versions of TiddlyWiki, as in having additional plugins and components, but I think you can make an edition for TiddlyWiki just by writing the getting started tiddler differently. So it's partly about the instructions that you offer, the terms. So to customize TiddlyWiki to be a lesson planner, say, a lot of that might just be conventions for how you use tags and how you use links, and the way that you communicate that is via a narrative rather than necessarily any kind of custom features. And yes, I'm completely with you. I think if we make it super easy for people to identify themselves with an edition that uses conventional language to say, I'm a to-do list manager, I'm a guitarist's chord book, or whatever the hell, that they recognize themselves, that we also possibly make it a bit easier for people to contribute, because it's a bit less of a it's not such a scary proposition to contribute to an edition, because that edition only needs to meet the needs of its audience, where contributing to TiddlyWiki is difficult because anything we do in TiddlyWiki needs to meet the needs of everybody, and that's one of the things that makes it complicated. So yeah, really with that, and going further, I would like the same editions to be available via a single click on Heroku, etc. So the Get Started button should be able to guide me through the edition I want, delivered in the configuration I want. So whether it's going to be a single file, whether I'm going to use it on Dropbox, or whether I want it to initialize a Node.js wiki folder for me.
Yeah, that was a question I had. How does like right now I'm on TiddlySpot, does it save the whole file every time?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, what if I want to host that?
On your own server?
Yeah.
There's a few options depending on what kind of server it is. You can do TiddlySpot style hosting where you have a PHP server. The TiddlyWiki still saves by doing an HTTP post of its entire stuff, and the PHP page just picks that up and chucks it into the file system. And if you want to hack and sort of mess around, that's a pretty nice, simple way of doing things. The other approach is to use how would we characterize it? A server that gives you individual tiddler synchronization, and so there, TiddlyWiki 5 works, but it's not brilliantly polished with TiddlyWeb, which is an existing server side for TiddlyWiki that works by syncing individual tiddlers. Or you can run the Node.js backend of TiddlyWiki 5, which provides a subset of the same HTTP interface. Yeah.
What is the largest, in megabytes
single file TiddlyWiki
that you've seen?
So this is such a fun question. There are many people out there who use multi-megabyte files all the time. So in the 3 to 8 megabyte range,
now is not remarkable at all. That seems to be quite commonplace, and obviously that must give people a limit to the network performance that they can tolerate. But of course, the save operation with TiddlySpot happens asynchronously, so it goes off and does its stuff, kicks off the save, and you can still use TiddlyWiki in the interim. But at the upper end, we had Dave Gifford playing around with 80 megabyte TiddlyWiki files, and he made 80 megabyte TiddlyWiki files with massive images. So that was two types of catastrophic flex, really, because big fat images expressed as data URIs is hellishly bad for the. Oh, Mark, do you need to be re-added? Is hellishly bad for browser performance. But the actual file size itself at 80 megabytes, of course, is also on the sizable side. And 80 megabytes, it works, but it's not great performance. So I think basically the situation we're in now is that if one started using TiddlyWiki 5 today for gathering text, I believe that the improvements in browser performance will outstrip your ability to grow your TiddlyWiki by typing new stuff. So the proviso there was about typing. Obviously, if you copy and paste vast tracts of text, it's going to get big. But I think in practice, the browser is no longer the limit, which is stunning. Extraordinary result, I think. So I need to draw towards a close actually today. Let's we'll do the saying goodbye in the normal way. But before we do, Mark, let me again express my gratitude for you popping up. Great to hear your story and how you're using TiddlyWiki. And I really hope, what I said, that the stuff that you've done, I think could be profoundly popular with TiddlyWiki users, and I hope that when you share it, you get the same amazing positive experience that I think Eric and Ton both have as well. So both Eric and Ton have website guides to TiddlyWiki, and I think get some satisfaction from the reception from other people, how useful they find it. And I'm really sure you'd find the same thing and get a lot of encouragement for what you've done, which is really an extraordinary amount of work.
Great, thank you.
And I hope also you'll be able to join us for subsequent sessions. I'm terrified and also thrilled at the thought of you listening to each hangout twice. Sometimes, the hangouts are a funny way of doing things, I think, because it can be quite lopsided. Sometimes it's just me. I think the least it's been has been me and Nathan maybe a few weeks ago. So it's also really good to that they are actually valuable enough to other people to want to sit through them. So at this point, we will wave goodbye to everybody and stop the broadcast. So that stops the YouTube recording part, and then we normally hang around for a second or two. I mean, the Hangout stays open, I think, until the last person leaves. So, guys, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Really appreciate your contribution. This has been very useful, interesting hangout for me. I've had some fun surprises in Mark's work, great feedback. So that's very useful, and thank you very much. And I say, really appreciate the time sacrifice that you're making. And now let's say goodbye to everybody who's joined us, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next hangout. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.